Tens of thousands of anti-government protesters have been marching on Bangkok's streets for a fourth day. The protest leader has, for the first time, said that he wants to replace the elected government of Yingluck Shinawatra with a People's Council. She has today called on demonstrators to end their blockades and hold talks. The protesters claim that the Prime Minister is controlled by her older brother, the ousted former leader Thaksin Shinawatra. He's been living in exile since fleeing Thailand in 2008 after being convicted of corruption. He left behind a country bitterly divided. On the one side, there were the yellow shirt protesters, the name for those opposed to Thaksin. On the other side were the red shirts, supporters of the deposed former Prime Minister. Well, today's anti-government protesters have adopted no colour, but many carry the red, white and blue national flag. The protesters say they are going to continue to target government ministries in a bid to cause disruption. The protest started around the Democracy Monument. They've spread, though, to a number of government buildings, including the Ministries of Tourism, Transport and Agriculture. They also targeted some of the more notable agencies today, such as the Interior Ministry and the Ministry of Finance. Their goal is to force the government, as I mentioned, from office. Our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head has been out with the protesters in Bangkok.
The anti-Thaksin army has moved on again, this time to the headquarters of Thailand's version of the FBI.
You can see all of us. We are unarmed. We have no political power to negotiate with them. The only thing we have here is our heart and our love for the country and the king. That's all.
But you know there are millions of people who still support the government very passionately. They feel just as strongly as you do. And they're Thai people too, aren't they?
Yeah, they're Thai people too. And it's common. It's everywhere in the world. You know, you have pros and cons. The only difference is knowledge. If you would go and talk to those people, not even 0.1% of them know exactly who Thaksin Shinawatra is. Just go and question them.
But do you think things would really change if Thaksin Shinawatra wasn't there? After all, other Thai leaders have also been corrupt.
Everywhere in this world, you can't find a pure white politician. And if from now on, this leader turns out the same way as, as Thaksin, we are ready to come out again.
But that means there will be protests
and protests and after protests.
And you're happy about that?
I'm not really happy. Nobody here is happy, I'm sure. But if that is needed, it must be done.
Let's try and make sense of everything that's been going on and speak to our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head, who is in Bangkok for us. Jonathan, we keep seeing these protests, the cycle of protests, it goes back 5 years. How is this all going to end? Is there a compromise that could be reached?
Not at the moment, no, there isn't. There are two implacable views. And bear in mind, there is a strong sense of legitimacy on both sides. On the protesters' side, they simply don't trust parliamentary democracy. They don't trust Thailand's institutions. They're very frightened of the amounts of power that a very wealthy, ambitious and skillful politician like Thaksin Shinawatra, remember, he was quite brilliant in his ability to win votes, the extraordinary amount of power he could concentrate in his hands, and they're frightened that'll happen again. They simply don't trust him. On the government side, remember, there's a tremendous sense of grievance there about all the unparliamentary means that have been used to keep them out of office. The coup against Mr. Thaksin, the court decisions that dissolved his party twice, those things also stand as a tremendous sense of grievance on their side. And there doesn't appear to be anything that can bring these two sides together and say, you've both got grievances, but in the end, we've got to find a way to make this democracy work. It's in some ways, it's growing pains. This is a country with a much bigger middle class now who dream of a much cleaner, more pure country than their country actually is. The political culture here is dirty, as it is in much of Southeast Asia. It's very corrupt. The rule of law is very weak. That's a part of life, and it didn't come with Thaksin. Thaksin didn't change it as much as he said he would. He isn't, in some ways, that much worse than many other leaders. But the viewpoints have become so divergent now, there doesn't seem to be any other way to bring them forward. And frankly, Lucy, I don't think anybody can tell you how this can end, because we're seeing at the moment something that we saw very, very similar exactly 5 years ago.
Briefly, Jonathan, the Education Minister told us that the government doesn't want to use force, but is there real concern now that the army might be called in or that there might be some violence?
Well, it was interesting, the Education Minister told me after his interview with you that was exactly what he feared. The government is frightened of the army because they've stepped in before. The army is very cautious because their coup in 2006 didn't bring them very much glory, and they're very nervous of what happened in 2010 when they were brought in and ended up killing more than 90 people. I think that's a very last resort, and I think this government would be extremely wary about asking the army to do that. And to be honest, so long as they can keep their majority in Parliament, there's no reason why they can't. They do have most of the seats. They can just ride these protests out, but it does leave Thailand feeling very, very jittery and very lawless at the moment, while these protesters still have the momentum to run around occupying ministries. So it's a risky strategy, but it may pay off for the government if the protesters eventually run out of steam.
Jonathan, thanks as always for joining us from Bangkok.